Samantha Willman is a Canadian writer, designer, and editor based in Montreal. She co-founded and co-edits Romanticon, a Substack literary magazine dedicated to Neo-romanticism and new Sincerity, alongside Anthony Galluzzo, Franz, and Matthew Gasda. She also publishes Marbl, a personal newsletter exploring intimacy, symbolism, and the interior life. Her 2016 book, Behind the First One, was published through the Canadian Academy in Rome. Samantha, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today and for being here. I really appreciate it.
Hello, good to see you. Good to finally get to
Yeah.
chat.
Yeah, it was great. I actually, like, really transparently, we actually managed to connect because I was at a friend's wedding ceremony and you were the officiant and you gave such an incredible, oh my God, the word that I'm looking for what the speech that is delivered is escaping me, and it is very embarrassing for me right now, but
Like
that's okay. I'll live through it.
ceremony?
Yeah,
I don't know
the
either,
ceremony. The ceremony that you gave was your own, that you wrote, and I was just like hanging on every word. And so I actually asked my friend Boston afterwards, like, how do you know and he was like, oh, she's a friend of ours. She's actually a romantic and a poet. You should actually, I think you would enjoy talking to her. I was like, I never do this, but yes, I will reach out. And I did so. And you were very gracious and agreed to come on here. And I'm like so pumped about that because I think that this is just my own objective that I'm talking about here. But like, I think that poetry is one of the most misunderstood and underappreciated formats out there right now. I think that whenever people are like, what can I go for in a good book? There's no shortage of recommendations, but whenever some people ask for good poetry, it's incredibly hard, it seems, to put something into somebody's hands that is actually going to affect them. I don't know. Does that feel like that's off the mark, or am I maybe close? Maybe got finger on the pulse.
I think that's very on the mark, and I think one reason for it is that, there's this Northrop Frye quote, which is like, the purpose of art's not unique. It's not for, it kind of rhymes. It's not for the elite. It's simply to wake to your life. And I feel like with poetry especially, like we think of art as post-Enlightenment people, and we think it's like this thing which happens in these isolated bubbles like galleries and theaters and concert halls, and it's sort of like walled off from the rest of our life, and we go there and then we have this like aesthetic experience and we want it to change us, but we don't ever actually connect it into our lives. So it's like with poetry, like we relegate it to these books, and it's hard to point out a book of poetry that you're gonna like take to a cafe on a Sunday afternoon and read and then have something transformative and that's something that really affects you if it's not like built into an occasion in your life or built into, the metabolization of something meaningful in your life. I think if maybe you had just lost someone really close and somebody with, a really strong poetic education kind of was able to see the poetic potential for you in that moment and suggest the right poem, I think that would actually change you really deeply and become very meaningful for you. But we don't have people with that kind of an education to like insert the right poem into the right part of life, right? Like instead we just think it's like, like this like recreational thing that will also touch our core, but like recreation and casual reading, it's like doesn't really.
I think that it's what you're saying about the curation, like the recommendation, like for music, it's very easy. It's very straightforward. It's like, oh my God, I heard this new track and you should check out because X, because of Y. And we're being consistently fed new music, TV, media, except for poetry. And that's the one format that you have to seek out. And it's interesting because I think that there's so much when I do sit with something and it does, I'm like, holy shit. But then I go looking for more. And of course, the very act of looking for it is like, okay, it doesn't seem like that other similar tangent or writer is hitting nearly as much as, and it's definitely down to form as well. I don't know. I think I have to ask the question that's sort of like the first part of this, which is like, I wonder for you going into poetry, but into that world in and of itself. Like, what was your understanding of it versus what it actually turned out to be?
Yeah, I think I think there were a few instances of poetry which gave me a little like twinkling insight. And then I was like, oh, this is like a useful or insightful or meaningful little nugget that I can like carry around. And then
Hmm.
I just carried it around for a little while until I like saw areas in my life where it's like, oh no, this is the way to see it. And it's not logical and it's not necessarily it's not actually useful, but it's like helping me confront or like move past or just live with like this part of my life. But it wasn't really until I started to write poetry that I could read poetry actually. Like
Oh, interesting.
I lived for a while in Rome. It was like part of my education. We just do a semester in Rome. I studied architecture, so it's a great place to study architecture, but the whole city is really like an old growth forest of urbanity. And it's really living and it's very erotic. Like you sit around fountains, there's like gushing water. Everything is so sensorial. You know, people linger at cafes. You know, like you have bar rails where like people's knees sort of like touch one another's and like you're
Hmm.
really in the city. It's in a way that you aren't really in North America. Like, you know, like people are in like, I don't know, like drive-through lines and like, you know, the line at Starbucks isn't crowded and you don't brush anybody's shoulder, you know. You don't even really talk
Yeah,
to
God forbid.
anybody. Yeah.
Yeah.
But while I was there, I don't know what it was, but I just felt like you know, like, and also I was young. And sometimes when you're young, you just go through these spontaneous, like, bouts of energy or like inspiration. And I just felt so like alive there. And I started to write poetry. And it was after that point that I was like, oh, I know, like, I understand the feeling, which is like something inside of me is like seeking understanding. And when I write it out, literally doesn't satisfy, it doesn't come to a truth, like an intrinsic felt sense of truth. But when I write it out, it non-literally, kind of senselessly, not logically, I can find forms of expression for these experiences and these emotions and these just situations that feel where like the expression is not literally true, but it's more true. It expresses the truth of what's going on, whether that was like relationships with other people or whatever. And then I just started to like hunt around for those like feelings of intrinsic rightness. I mean, the philosopher Charles Taylor, he writes a lot about poetry. He had a great book, I think 2025, called Cosmic Connections, looking at romantic poetry. In there, he talks, and its precursor, The Language Animal, he talks about this sense of like intrinsic rightness. Everybody knows that feeling. Like that is when a good song hits, or, you know, like, or a metaphor makes sense. It's like a metaphor might have nothing to do with its target subject, but like when it really makes sense, you're like that's intrinsic rightness. And I just started in Rome. It just felt like there was all this like material around me to work with, and then started to write poetry. And then when I was reading poetry, it was like way easier to like imagine what the poet along that line of thinking might be trying to say to me.
I think that's the beauty of what it's capable of, is this lateral,
Mm,
this being in the same room as the words, being in the same room as the feeling.
mm,
Or I mean, I'm doing it a disservice, obviously, but there's so many different threads to go from there. First of all, I got to acknowledge, you mentioned Charles Taylor. His book, The Malaise of Modernity, was
mm.
had a very big impact on me back in the day. So thank you for name dropping him. It's a good reminder that I should revisit that. And also that newer book that you mentioned, I should definitely check out, I think. But also, I think that you're right, that it's not just right, but also like it's so interesting to hear you talk about the experience in Rome, because I have had the privilege of going and exploring with my wife. It was all through various different cities. And you're right. There's something intrinsic where there's a base assumption that's different from here in North America, which is that, oh no, we're all here smashed up together. And that's what life is. It's like this.
Yeah.
there's a different base assumption of it's like this. And I do think that there is something so much more revealing when you start to allow a freedom of meaning with words. If you let, there's this kind of like thing that you're accessing. And I haven't heard it described in the way that you've just done. And it's really cool to hear you kind of open my mind to that's exactly what it is. So that's super cool. I wanted to ask, like, for you, it's such an interesting thing, like not being able to really not enjoy it, but I think like once you started writing poetry, then you started to enjoy it that much more. Who were some of the writers in particular that really struck you either around that period or since then, like to whoever you feel like sharing with anyone, should they be any listeners?
Yeah. So after that point, when I was a kid, I actually would read poetry. Like, and thank God for the internet because I grew up in a really small hick town where there was no bookstore and I didn't really go to the library. It wasn't like a family habit. But I don't know, like the internet, you could just download PDFs in like 2002 and I would read like Lord Byron, which now it's so funny because I edit a Romanticism magazine. Yeah. So I went back to Lord Byron. And then like there's a lot of like I guess like maybe like cliche younger people poetry like Bukowski and Sylvia Plath, who I started to dig into. But like I'm really excited. There's this new movie. I think they're making The Bell Jar into a production with Billie Eilish, I believe. Anyways, Sylvia, I mean, she's
What?
like quintessential emo girl, like, but she's so good. She's
She's
one of
so
my
good.
favorite poets, or one of my favorite poems, The Colossus is hers. And then from there, I just started to branch out. I got really into Octavio Paz, Spanish. And, it's a little weird reading like translated poetry, but, when you're young, you're just like consuming whatever. And, you might not have maybe a cultural or academic understanding of it, but, if it works its magic on you, it doesn't really matter. And then I got into Wallace Stevens, and he really mesmerized me. Yeah, and maybe he's lesser known, I don't know, but it was like not until I was like 30 that I found another human being who had read Wallace Stevens. And when I did, I was like, oh my gosh, my people, like, but I don't know what about his work. It jumps around a lot, like, like I find like a poem to give it a sense of wholeness or completeness, it'll often have like a sort of anchoring metaphor cluster or a tone that it sticks to. Like, you'll find within one poem a lot of like, say, water themes or a lot of like heat, fire themes, depending on the subject matter, right? Like I find poets, and when I'm writing poetry, I tend to like try and cluster my concepts, my words, these things to give, a sense of atmosphere, a sense of tone that is coherent. Wallace, he just like jumps around a lot, like each word sentence to the next. He brings together, it's like he's using the whole tarot deck of the world to like, I don't know, like, first you're like death card, then, like, and then you've got the fool, like, and then the hierophant, like, I don't know, it's just like, it creates like a very, I don't know, it's like, it feels like he's working with a really wide palette of concepts, forms, images, and I liked that a lot. He's more of I guess he's a modernist, but yeah, I really fell in love with his work.
Amazing. I've already made notes as we're speaking. I'm like, yep, gotta check that out and that. But I think this is a good point to talk about the actual movement that you're helping to in whatever capacity and way. You co-founded and co-edit Romanticon, and it is a literary magazine. It's dedicated to Neo-romanticism and new Sincerity. I'd be very grateful if you could give your introduction to anyone who's not aware of those movements as to what those might be and why they're good bedfellows.
Yeah, so Romanticism and it's like, in its original sort of permutation, that's like I guess you would look at like Keats, Shelley, and, poets like that. And this arose in the context of the Enlightenment. So, like at that time in history, you had a kind of reduction of the world. Like prior to that, if you left the cities and you went into the countries, people would have really strong superstitions, really strong Christian faith, even like pagan beliefs. were still alive and thriving in the French countryside and the German countryside. And then, but within the cities, you've got this rising, like, intellectual movement of the Enlightenment. Science is really being formalized, and things are being reduced down to like a Cartesian sort of understanding of the world. But in that context, sorry, I don't think I'm really explaining this well, but there was a resistance
No, you're
to
doing
that.
great. Right. And so it's a counter movement to this reductionist sort of, it's a colder kind of, well, we're reducing it. So obviously with that scientific way of looking at it, it's reducing those things. But you're right. I thought it was really great point that you bring up, which is like that only happened in like intellectual centers. So it doesn't matter to the people out in the fields. It's a great point. My God.
Oh, yeah.
So with that was Romanticism, and then this Neo-romanticism movement is a hearkening back to that, would you say?
Yeah, so the idea is that, like, with the Romantics, they said, hey, no, actually, there are truths that individuals have held within their soul. Like, there are mysteries in the world that we have yet to know anything about. And we really feel like there's a sort of shared, like, history rhymes. And right now, with, like, in the last 20 years, with the rise of tech and now into AI, like, an optimization culture, we really feel like there's a sort of similar context occurring, intellectual context, where, like, we need to reassert that, like, that there are truths in our souls, which are kind of mysteries to the world of the measured world and the optimizable world. And those things matter, and they're legible, maybe not measurable, maybe not quantifiable, but they are legible. And one of the ways that we, like, make them apparent is through literature, is through poetry, is through, like, just creativity in general, creative works. Yeah. More recently, with postmodernity, like, irony and a lack of sincerity became a hallmark of creative life, actually. And so the new Sincerity movement, which is actually like a very long movement, but we wanted to, we sort of saw that as a romantic impulse as well. And so it's not really that, like, like, history rhymes, but everything is also new and unseen. So it's not really like Neo-romanticism is back in the same way that it was, I don't know, in the 1800s, but we do think there's something perennial there, and, like, it exists in the reassertion of mystery and the mystery of nature and the creative spirit.
It's such an antidote right now, because I mean, I quite literally this morning was going off on a bit of a tangent just because I had made the mistake of opening Instagram and just saw the very first. I follow the Humanity Archive. He's a fellow with his own Substack, and unfortunately, given the nature of the world that we are in currently, it was just yet another drop of acid in my soul. Just no more horror that I'm exposed to. And I just, as a response, just sort of lashed out. I do that by writing sometimes, but sometimes I just literally need to say it out loud. So I have you talk about optimization culture. I am like the worst at it, and I'm aware of it, and I'm working on it. I don't advocate for it. Really, I think that I've used it as a crutch and a distraction a lot of the time, so that I can, like, try to explain away the lack of progress on projects. I'm like, well, if I do this, then by the time I do it, it'll be that much more efficient, which is bullshit a lot of the time. And so I've come to see that, especially with someone who's, like, been diagnosed pretty late in the game with ADHD. And so, which, I mean, get in line, right? Story of so many different people. I think that it's such an antidote, though, what you're saying, the new Sincerity, which also feels like an antidote, not just for my own personal experience this morning, because that's one aspect, but I do feel like it might be an antidote for some of the shorthand that fascist movements have made these days. I know I'm making a big leap there, but maybe I'm not. I don't know. I feel like the meme culture and the tech bro way, like the Twitter discourse, is definitely the way that people, this constant perseverance on irony and post-irony and post-irony, like, just this. I remember going to university in 2007 and discovering Vice magazine for the first time, because I'm from some fucking podunk small town, Caledon East.
Well, yeah.
And so, yeah. And so you open up a Vice and you're like, what the, wow, they're so cutting and they're so, mean? Is this what being cool is? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and then it's very funny though that since then, the biggest progenitors of that type of cutting, ironic, biting, sardonic kind of way of being and view have become like the biggest proponents of fascism and of violence, like Gavin McInnes or whatever the fuck his name is, and another douche, Tim Pool. He was also at Vice, believe it or not. So it's fun. It's interesting, isn't it? That this like, the seat of culture of like the subculture or whatever once upon a time. Turns out it's a bit sus. And so maybe I'm projecting a little bit, but I also kind of think I'm not. I think I might be not totally wrong about that. What's your take?
Yeah. So just like gut take is that like there's a place and time for antagonism and competition, and those things, like just maybe looking at it in a longer arc. There's a point in philosophy where if you go back to Plato, he was writing dialogues, and the truth of what he was saying was never actually written down. You had to read between the lines of all the interlocutors to try and, like, each interlocutor kind of pointed in a certain direction. And then once you got through the dialogue, you were given a sort of place, a stance in relation to a truth that was never made explicit. But then like you fast forward and suddenly, like with analytical philosophy, like we are starting from first principles, we are starting from nothing, and which is never really the case, but you lay out your assumptions and then you build them from there. And then you've also got argument as a form of thinking. So rather than interlocutors discussing and then each laying out a dimension of the issue and sort of interpolating and interposing those perspectives, it's just perspective against perspective, and one of them is going to win. Like you've got all these are all methods of creating a stance towards something, methods of sort of refining a perspective. They're also methods of building identity and habitus, like intellectual habitus, your sort of attitude or your identity as a thinker. And all of that work and play is important. But I feel like having a well-rounded, if you're a fighter and you can only, I don't know anything about fighting, but if you can only kick and somebody throws a good punch and you don't know how to defend it, like you're sort of at a disadvantage if you don't have a full wheelhouse of moves. And I think it's likewise for thinking. Argumentation can do some things that other forms of thinking can't do. But it's not the only way to think. And it's just people who are so defensive and vicious. It's like, man, like, I know you're a person. Like, I know you hold irrational beliefs. I know that you harbor sentimentality. Like, you don't want to show it to me, but I'm not, like, I wasn't born yesterday. Like, I know it's there. Like, can we all just, like, put down this strongly cultivated identity so full of artifice and get at something a little more believably human, like, and then talk about whatever it is we're trying to get to the bottom to? Yeah, so it's like, I don't know. I find whenever I'm like, oh my God, this douchebag, like, what is he going on about? It's usually the result of like layers and layers of defenses and an identity that reeks of unartful artifice. Like we build our identities, and identity play is a super interesting part of human life, and I think one that the internet has really provoked in interesting ways. But like when there's a certain resistance between the self and the identity, you really sense it. And yeah, I think that all comes to the fore when we're arguing online.
I think so.
Yeah.
God, I literally had goosebumps at one point because those are good. That's such a good response, and also it's a great reminder. Thank you for going right back to the classics as well for that one. Wow, that really.
There's
my dad's a
nothing
classics
new.
major, and yeah, exactly. You read the classics and you read Marcus Aurelius, and you'll just go, babe, me too. Like,
Yeah.
I can't help but like feel like, oh my God, like Epictetus, you're killing me over here. And that's why it's so delightful and also kind of exhausting at the same time, going all the way back to the classics, or even just like the Romantics or any of these other movements are like, God damn it, there's nothing. Are we literally just doing the same thing with different clothing. Like, what's up, you know? But it's unprecedented because all the toys are different, you know? I get it. But also, yeah, you're right. It is constructed artifice. I mean, it's a really disarming response, I have to say, that you've given, because you're right. So much so that I'm struggling to come to the next question that I had a second ago. But I think when it comes to the new sincerity, it's not trying to be, what I'm teasing out from that is that it's not about being earnest necessarily constantly. Instead, it's about recognizing and appreciating that there's a truth and honesty that one should not, like, you know, blindly adhere to, but instead just like think about it, actually like stay in that sometimes and respect and give it space, both for yourself, but also like artistically and creatively. Am I getting close to it maybe?
Yeah, I think so. Not that I know that new sincerity is something that is tightly defined as an artistic genre, but just in relating to the project that we're trying to undertake, like I'm constantly reminding myself that philosophia like means love of truth, you know, and like love is important, right? Like all the people that you have interviewed on this podcast, all of them are operating out of a motive of love, whether they're musicians or well, I guess you predominantly interview musicians. Like there's some experience, not just of love, of truth, but of love that you have when you know, to bring it back, when you strike at that intrinsically right expression, whether it's in a song or a piece of poetry, or even just even prose, you know, it's like truth isn't neutral. Like it's not like we can have this cool, detached sort of like relationship to it. Like if you want to engage in philosophy, then you had better be a lover. I mean, Chino, you know, sorry, I like reading commentary on Plato's Symposium, I believe. He starts it with like this little epithet, which is like will not reveal herself to somebody who doesn't love her. And I just think that's so true. Like, that's a more animistic kind of understanding of truth. But like, think about even a person. If we agree that people harbor unique truths that need the right context, the right practices to reify and bring into the world and instantiate in some way, like, if you don't love a person, they're not going to reveal their truth to you. They're going to put up a wall and be unsincere and ironic and biting and vicious and mean, right? Like if you actually like betray some sense of care for them, you'll get more of the truth of them. And I think the world is very much like personifiable in that sense. Like if you betray a sense of care, you're going to get a different perspective, a different face from the world.
I don't often go in for the divine. I love my Jungian archetypes and all that, but right now I'm having that moment of synchronicity that's a little so strong that I'm like choking up a little bit, because that rant I was telling you about this morning, I let it literally is, I have it in my database on Notion, because that's the kind of level of optimizer that I am, but don't hold it against me. But I literally, the name of it, the title I gave it was Maybe Love Isn't Going to Prevail. Literally, I was just spewing just vitriol. I was just so... I lived in anger for a very long time, and I continue to sometimes. And that was one moment where, let's put it this way. I read Thomas Ligotti's The Conspiracy Against the Human Race, and I actually felt seen, which isn't probably a good sign. That's probably not a good sign that you like read something of that caliber of nihilism and go, oh, this is great. This is maybe not it's a pretty horrific treatise, and that's the point. His scariest book, I'd say. Coming back to what you said though, like, I think that animism is so much more delightful than whatever putrid codification and tokenization that we're doing with large language models and generative AI. We're settling for so much when it comes to our art. We're settling for so much when it comes to even just basic commerce. I mean, people just accept things and don't make complaints anymore. And I'm like, well, that's literally how a business improves, is when people complain. I'm like that annoying guy where I'm like actually like doing the thing where I'm like, I'd actually like to put this out there, because somewhere in your system, hopefully a manager will look at that and do it. And if they don't, well, whatever. But like, God, I've gotten away from the original point. The point is that it's a really, really important reminder that it is important to come from a place of love and to not lose sight of that. And it's eerie that you came in out of nowhere to remind me of that this morning of all mornings. Oh my God. Like, it's just very goosebumpy. And that's why I think that when I think of the Romantics and I think of that entire movement, it's because there is this like gold dust, this fairy dust that we have with certain moments of our experience in our lives. And they're so real to us and so tangible and they're so loud and they echo. That's why I'm so excited about what you're doing, because it's showing people like this exists and there's so much of it. And here is like a curated list of this type of experience that we're trying to not just share, but also support at the same time. And that's actually a huge component of what you do, is building a community of people that are actually looking for that. And I wanted to know more about that process of building community. Was it something that you knew you were going to do when you started out with the magazine?
No, it was sort of like an idea that we all stumbled into along the way. Yeah, so initially the ambition was just to publish on Substack and work our way up to like get a reservoir of works in order to work towards some print editions. But then I think it was Anthony who really spearheaded this. One of my co-editors, Anthony Galluzzo. Two of the editors live in New York, one in Kingston, Ontario, and then I'm in Montreal. In New York, Anthony started organizing these poetry readings. And, like, I mean, just to take it back a little in response to what you had said just about general nihilism, like this is a big issue for Romanticism is, when we think of the word romanticizing, it usually means to add like this layer of pixie dust or to sugarcoat something is often how that's seen. But yeah, I do want to remind myself that a lot of the works of the Romanticism, like the paintings of Caspar David Friedrich or Turner, maybe, like these bleak, sublime landscapes that overcome the human figure in the picture, or sometimes are entirely without any like human scale reference. Like these dark parts of life are just as much in the purview of Romanticism as, like the obviously romantic aspects of life.
Interesting.
And
It's a good point.
I think that Anthony maybe, because he started the first poetry readings and he called it Epiphanies. And so the idea was, I think maybe he was feeling a little bit the same way you were. And it's important to really grapple with like what's going on in the world. And so he brought a bunch of writers together at I think like the Center for Theater Research was where the first one was held. And yeah, they did a poetry reading, and the broad ambition with that was just like there had been a lot of readings popping up in New York, which had been, I guess, lacking sincerity and also maybe not metabolizing the biggest parts, like without putting any readings down. Like I think he saw a lot of readings in New York that were really centered around the ego and and like the New York scene itself. And he wanted to get away from that and actually talk about life and like metabolize some bigger issues in the world with a little bit more sincerity, a little bit more romanticism. He called it epiphanies because an epiphany is kind of like an insight of like truth that comes from the soul. So he began that in New York, and then I continued doing the series. We kind of oscillate between New York and Montreal with poetry readings in Montreal. And so, yeah, it was just to segue back into the community building. It's been a really fun experience. And I guess like we had our last one last Saturday. It was at a place called Will's Bar in Montreal, and it was really good. I was so amazed by the turnout. I think there was like 60 or 70 people, which,
Whoa.
I think I was surprised by how many
God.
people were there, and like the feedback was great. I realized like, wow, people are really hungry for some like non-consumptive ways to hang out, like
Mm-hmm.
a lot of our social lives really just revolve around like eating and drinking, which don't get me wrong, I love that. But yeah, I think there's like a different mode that people want to get into. And it was so good. Like we had photographers and videographers who just like showed up and started to like take photos and like film people.
Oh,
All the
cool.
readers were like amazing. It was, yeah, it just like it felt very much like you just build it and they come.
Yeah,
And
true. Yeah.
yeah, like there's, I guess if there's like, if you identify the need, the people will respond. But we're having another one coming up in Chicago. One of our writers, Samara, she is going to be organizing an Epiphanies reading there. So yeah, we're trying to just get a little network going of readings. And it wasn't like an ambition of ours, like I said from the beginning. It's really something that we stumbled into, but it seems to be going really well, and it seems to be something that's like needed. And it's nice because we're a romanticism magazine on Substack. Like we like
Right.
talk a lot about like the distraction of the digital era, and yet we're like embedded in it. But like events like these, it really brings in a human contact element, which I think is just, it's great. It feels really like in line with what we're trying to do. Yeah, I think like
so amazing.
Oh, thank you. Amongst the editors, I tend to be the most like optimistic about the internet. Like I'm really grateful that we have the internet. I don't think I would have been as able to step into my own individuating process if I hadn't had access to text and to events and to people that the internet afforded me. I really feel like I would be like working at McDonald's in my hometown still. But
Thank you. Yeah, I think that I relate to that so hard because there are certain people that know, like, oh man, if I hadn't had like access to the internet, I would not have been able to like there's no Seekers books or bloody BMV books down the street from me in Caledon East. It's not going to happen. You got to go all the way into. No, it's not going to happen. No chance. No, I 100% agree.
I mean, no hate on McDonald's nor my hometown, but I feel like there's a certain lack of, like, that's just, like, I feel like I would have stayed in the situation that I was in. Sometimes you need a little glimpse of what's out there before you can, like, start exploring.
I think so. And I think that it's very revealing about your character that you also are quick to not let that be cast as an aspersion. That's interesting because there is this constant, an enduring view of poets as being arrogant and higher than and all that. But it seems that it's actually, in this particular movement, it's one where that's precisely the thing that it's not going for. We don't, the whole, well, I actually know and have X, Y, Z. It's like, oh, we don't do that here. Is that fair to say?
Well, everybody, if you believe that there is a unique truth in everybody's soul, then it's just never going to come from the same pathway, right? Like you need different lives to produce different perspectives of what is true and different true perspectives of what is true, right? Like not literally true, but true. Also, this is really important for the tradition of Romanticism, actually, because like the Enlightenment, that came out of institutions. That came top down, like, like there's this movie called The Grimm Brothers with Heath Ledger in it that I actually really love. And it talks about...
I haven't thought about that movie in so long. Oh my God.
So
wow.
Cute. Yeah, it's like a kid's movie, but like the Grimm brothers, like they go out into the countryside and it's like the French government is like trying to get the people, the country folk to stop being so superstitious and believing in fairy tales. And meanwhile, the Grimm brothers are like writing down their fairy tales as this culture of pagan superstition is being like beaten out of them. And it culminates in them like burning down the enchanted forest. Anyways, it's a good picture of what was happening at the time. Granted, like it's hyperbolic and Disneyfied in a way, but
it's a movie.
But the Enlightenment, yeah, it came out of institutions. It was top down. It's like this is the truth. Meanwhile, and so a lot of the figures in and Enlightenment thought, these are people who truth was their day job, They were professors, they were at the heads of these institutions. But like a lot of romantic poets and a lot of really good poets, truth was not their day job. Like William Blake was an engraver. Wallace Stevens worked at an insurance company his whole life. Like, I mean, not that he's necessarily romantic. But like another one of my favorite painters, Clifford Still, he was like showing in galleries with Rothko, I believe, in New York, and then was like, this New York art scene is putrid. Everyone's horrible to each other. I don't need to be a part of this. He moved to the Midwest, became an art teacher, and then just painted, like had a family, had a wife, had a couple kids, and just painted this like crazy oeuvre of like amazing, really like valuable paintings. And then like when he died, it was just like in his will, he gave the entire collection to any municipality that would build a gallery to harbor them all together. He had sold like none of his paintings. I mean, Van Gogh had sold like none of his paintings. You know, like these people were working.
Wow.
Just like, you know, like you do what you do to live, and then the love of truth sort of calls to you. And it might not, you know, it might not be this glamorous thing where, I don't know, you're, you know, like you're the Justin Bieber of your day or something, right? Like, you know, you might not be the director of the, I don't know, whatever institution, but that doesn't mean that what you're working at doesn't have lasting influence, or that like, and I think it also, it does suggest that maybe you might need to work at an insurance company just to pay your bills so as to be in the position that you can lovingly approach truth. Like, you know, like sometimes like certain positions of responsibility entail commitments to something you might not fully believe in, and that the truth of your soul may not resonate with, right? Like, yeah.
I mean, I would be hard pressed to improve on that answer. God damn. I mean, it's so well put. And those are tremendous examples. I was not aware of the artist whose name already escapes me. That's my memory for you. Who moved to the Midwest. And that was Rothko, you said?
Oh, no. Clifford Still. He was a contemporary of Rothko.
Still, sorry. Yes. Yeah. Right. Okay. Thank you. It's such a good answer. And it's also kind of fighting right to the heart of what we talk about on here, which is that, and what I see with all of my artists, not all, sorry, but like a lot of my artists, there's this tension between like, am I doing the wrong thing by like doing the thing that I'm more passionate about in a much smaller amount of time? Should I maybe like be doubling down or going full send or whatever it might be? And I constantly have to remind them, like, as long as you are alive and well and healthy, like you need to take care of you and do the art from not a place of pain. You can channel pain and talk about pain. The starving artist thing, we're over that. We're done with that. Okay. Take care of you, live your life for the love of God, and then like create from that place. It's such an important point, and it is so lost on us because we are constantly subjected to people that are constantly being like, yeah, I just was doing this thing and then finally it popped off and here we are. And it's like, I'm 23 and it's like, what the have I done everything wrong? No, of course not. You know what I mean? It's such a good point. And I'm aware of time as well. So like, I want to make sure that like, out of respect for you, but also everything that you're doing, I want to like just give a cavalcade of ways that people can consume and support what you're doing, because it sounds like such a cool community. First of all, what if you had to, what's the number one call to action that you would ask that people do? So obviously sign up for the newsletter.
Yeah, you can go, it's Romanticon on Substack. Go subscribe to that. And yeah, especially if you're Montreal, follow us on Instagram. Yeah. So that's kind of how we tend to promote the readings.
Oh, nice. Okay, great.
Yeah.
What's the handle?
It's Romanticon 60. I don't know. You know, and it was just like we couldn't find a single Romanticon handle because it's 2026. So
it's a hard one. Yeah.
Yeah. Substack. Yeah.
I'll put all those links for you, by the way, in the show notes. So anybody who's listening, go and just go to the bloody links. This is my job. I got to make sure that all that shit's there. So you can just go click and then follow and then subscribe and do all that stuff. And obviously, next time you're throwing an event, there's obviously anyone in Chicago, go check out that show or reading. When's that happening?
Actually, off the top of my head, I'm not sure, but in the coming weeks.
I can't see you, but that's okay.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'll give you the exact date.
So yeah, and also your own newsletter as well. We talked a lot about.
Oh yeah, yeah. You can also follow me on. Yeah, it's just another Substack. I write at Marbl without an E. Marbl.substack.com. Yeah, I did want to say, okay, just in relation to what you were saying, like about working in less amount of time, it like Rilke wrote two of the greatest pieces of poetry in the span of like, it was like a single year in his life. And in 2 weeks, I think it was like 2 weeks, he wrote um Duino Elegies, and then later that year, in another bout of energy, he wrote Sonnets to Orpheus. If you're a tech bro and you believe in the reduction of the creative vital life force down to mere seconds and minutes, yeah, you've got less time if you're working a day job. But that's not how creativity works. Like, like sometimes things come to you in a violent stream, and when you know, like production isn't creative production is inspiration. It's not productive. It's very different than living in the 4HL or optimizing your time. When you need to say something, you'll have to say it. And it's kind of funny because Rilke, after that point in time, his poetry after that point, like, it's like he's writing as if he's already dropped the mic. He knows he's already produced some of the greatest poetry that mankind has. And so he's just writing these little poems about roses and like just like kind of luxuriating in the creative process in a way that like I hope for all of us, for all of your podcast listeners, like, like open up whatever little space you have and what needs to be said will come through. And after that, just like create and joy.
I think that's a mic drop right there. Like, I don't think there's what a great point to end on. Like, maybe I'll just edit this blathering from me out. That's like, end. That'd be so dramatic.
Fun.
That'd be great, I think. For anyone, this has been fun. Thank you. It's also been like oddly affecting. So thank you for that. And I feel like there's so much more wisdom and insight to be gained. I've already subscribed myself, and I'm currently doing a lot of catch up in reading. And I feel like the Substack app itself is quite discovery oriented, so it's suggesting a whole bunch of stuff to me, and I'm like, I have subscribed to specific these, so I appreciate the other stuff. But it's a great platform. I'm really, really excited about everything that you guys are doing, and I'll hand it over to you for the final word on anything that you'd like to impart, any further bits before we sign off for today.
I don't know. I don't have any final thoughts.
I mean, it's hard to follow that up, so that'd be like a Rilke post Sonnets to Orpheus. So just to use an example from somebody that gave me that. Yeah, I really appreciate it. And I'm so looking forward to seeing and consuming far more of your work and others as well. So, and if you're ever doing a show in Toronto or Hamilton, do let me know so that I can hopefully make it out.
Okay,
on the rare occasion
I'm really glad that we were
able
able to have this conversation. And I'm glad that I've likewise found your podcast. It's been really great listening.
I appreciate that.